Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Three years ago, I was working a casual job at a pet shop, struggling to save for a house while dealing with my attention deficit and depression. The housing market was brutal, and finding an affordable place to live seemed impossible until I came across this small bedsit advertised by an older lady. The place was basically a converted extension of her main house, just a bedroom with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it was perfect for my budget at $150 a week. She also had these two cabin-like structures in her backyard that she called meditation retreats, which she rented out for way more than they were worth, plus a community bookshed at the bottom of her property. When I first viewed the place, I told her how much I appreciated the tour and mentioned that the space was exactly what I was looking for. She responded by saying she had a good feeling about me and thought we would get along well. And for the first year, we did. She'd bring me homemade soup, we'd play table tennis in her shed, and I'd help her out by taking her greenways to the tip and getting her discounted pet food from the shop where I worked. She was a regular marijuana user, which I didn't judge her for, even though it wasn't legal here in Australia. Everything changed during my second year there, right when COVID hit. She invited me over for what I thought would be our usual friendly chat. She started the conversation by telling me she needed to raise my rent. When I asked her how much, she dropped the bomb. She wanted an extra $50 a week, but there was a catch. She wanted me to stop claiming government rent assistance because she wanted all payments in cash, with nothing declared. I explained to her that what she was suggesting was pension fraud, and that I couldn't afford to lose my assistance, especially with how uncertain everything was during COVID. She insisted we needed to work something out, admitting she was trying to maximize her pension payments. We eventually compromised on $350 per fortnight, and I even sent her an email saying I understood if she wanted to find someone else who could pay more, but she insisted she wanted me to stay. That's when the weird behavior started. She stopped bringing soup, no more table tennis invitations. She'd barely acknowledge me when we crossed paths. Then came the invasive inspections. She'd enter my bedsit while I was out and take photos of any mess she found. Yes, I struggled with keeping things tidy due to my attention deficit and depression, but it wasn't nearly as bad as she made it out to be. One day, she confronted me with a list of complaints. She claimed the neighbors had been complaining about me. When I mentioned that I'd just spoken with them and they'd said they had no issues with me, she quickly changed tactics. She accused me of attracting rats with my mess. I pointed out that she was the one leaving chicken feed out all day and keeping her back door open for them. She then nitpicked about me leaving lights on and accused me of having two heaters. I had to explain that what she thought was a second heater was actually an air purifier that was always turned off when I wasn't there. The harassment continued until she finally gave me a month's notice, claiming her sister was moving in. This was during the peak of COVID when finding a new place was nearly impossible. I had to rehome my budgies and scramble to find somewhere to live while dealing with severe depression. Thankfully, I found a place with some friends who helped me through the tough times. Once I was settled and my mental health improved, I decided it was time for some payback. First, I collected several invasive sea stars from the nearby beach. After washing them in fresh water to ensure a quick death, I strategically placed them behind the bookshelves in her community bookshed, far enough back that she'd need to empty the entire shelf to reach them. The smell once they started decomposing would be memorable. Then I made 3 important phone calls. I contacted the tax department to report her for tax evasion. Next, I called the pension office to report her pension fraud. Finally, I rang the council to report her unauthorized rental structures. A month later, I drove past her place and noticed the meditation retreats were gone. A friend who still lived in the area told me the council had done a surprise inspection and found multiple violations. They forced her to demolish the unauthorized structures and fined her heavily. The tax department and pension office had also launched investigations into her finances. She had to sell her house to pay the fines and back taxes. She moved in with her sister, the one who was supposedly moving into my bedsit. Never thought I'd have to deal with such pettiness when my wife and I moved into this neighborhood 5 years ago. We chose this house specifically because of its large yard, perfect for honoring my great-grandfather's memory. He wasn't just any veteran, he was a decorated World War I hero who saved his entire unit during the Battle of Belleau Wood. The medals he earned weren't just pieces of metal, they represented sacrifice, courage, and everything our family stands for. The statue was my father's idea. He'd been saving up for years to have it made, and when he finally commissioned it, the artist did an incredible job capturing every detail, from my great-grandfather's determined expression to the exact medals on his uniform. We placed it in our front yard, positioned so it would catch the morning sun. It was our way of keeping his memory alive, and honestly, it made me proud every time I looked at it. Then the Homeowners Association got involved. The first ticket came 3 days after we installed the statue. The HOA president left a note explaining that we were violating Section 8.3 of their community guidelines, which apparently didn't permit decorative structures exceeding 4 feet in height in front yards. When I tried to explain that this wasn't just a decoration but a memorial to a war hero, they simply repeated that rules were rules and gave us 72 hours to remove it. We paid the ticket but kept the statue. Then another ticket came and another. Each time we paid without removing the statue. It was becoming expensive, but this was about principle. My wife suggested we fight it legally, but I wanted to avoid unnecessary confrontation. Looking back, I should have listened to her. One morning I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. 2 bulldozers were in my yard, and several Homeowners Association board members were directing them straight toward the statue. I ran outside in my pajamas, shouting at them to get off my property. Karen, the HOA vice president, smugly told me that I'd been warned repeatedly and that the board had voted to take direct action. When I told her this was illegal and that they couldn't just destroy private property, she had the nerve to quote Bylaw 12.4 at me, claiming they could take corrective measures after 3 violations. Before I could even call the police, they'd already knocked the statue down. The sound of it crashing to the ground. I'll never forget it. My wife was already on the phone with 911, and I was recording everything on my phone. The police arrived within minutes. The officer immediately ordered Karen and her crew to leave the property. When Karen tried to argue that they were within their rights and had documentation, the officer shut her down, explaining that they needed a court order for something like this and that they were guilty of destruction of private property and criminal trespassing. The satisfaction of watching Karen and her cronies being escorted off our property was just the beginning. The real victory came during the civil suit. Our lawyer was brilliant. He not only went after the Homeowners Association's insurance, but also filed personal suits against each board member involved. The discovery process revealed something interesting. Karen had a personal vendetta. She'd been trying to sell her house for months, and apparently, having a war memorial in the neighborhood was bringing down property values. The emails between board members showed they knew what they were doing was illegal, but they thought we wouldn't fight back. They ended up paying us 10 times the statue's value, all their legal fees, and every ticket we'd ever paid them. Karen and 2 other board members were forced to resign. We used the money to commission an even larger statue, and this time we got a proper permit from the city that superseded Homeowners Association regulations. The new statue stands 7 feet tall now, with a beautiful plaque detailing my great-grandfather's service record. Every Memorial Day, local veterans gather around it to pay their respects. Karen still lives in the neighborhood, but she takes the long way around just to avoid driving past our house. I never expected to find love again after my first marriage ended. My ex-husband and I divorced when I was 28, and I spent 2 years focusing on my career as a restaurant manager. That's where I met my current husband. He was a regular customer who always came in with his adorable 2-year-old daughter. Our relationship blossomed naturally. He was kind, attentive, and his daughter was the sweetest little thing I'd ever met. When we married, I promised myself I would love his daughter as my own, and I have. For the past 12 years, I've been there for every milestone, every triumph, and every tear. She calls me mom, and I couldn't be prouder. My mother, though, that's a different story. She's always been particular about appearances and proper family structures. When I first told her I was dating a single father, she made this face like she'd eaten something sour. Still, I thought she'd come around once she got to know them both. I was wrong. The first real incident happened at Thanksgiving dinner. My stepdaughter had spent weeks perfecting a green bean casserole recipe she'd found online. I asked everyone how they were enjoying the food. My mother took a bite of the casserole and called it interesting in that tone that clearly meant she didn't like it. When my stepdaughter anxiously asked if she'd done something wrong, my mother told her the dish was rather bland and suggested that maybe cooking wasn't her thing. I tried to defend my stepdaughter, pointing out how hard she'd worked, but my mother dismissed me, saying she was just being honest and someone had to be. After that, it became a pattern. Every family gathering, every potluck, my mother would find something wrong with my stepdaughter's cooking. The criticism got nastier and more frequent. This past week was my mother's birthday party. I'd had enough of her behavior, so I decided to teach her a lesson. 6 months ago, she'd given me some of her famous curry to freeze. I thawed it out and brought it to the party. When my mother asked who made the curry, I told her that her granddaughter had made it, trying to copy her grandmother's recipe. My mother took a bite and launched into a harsh critique, declaring it terrible, complaining about overcooked chicken and wrong spices. She even told my stepdaughter that she should stop bringing food to these gatherings because it was embarrassing. That's when I revealed my trap. I told her that this was actually her own curry, the same one she'd made 6 months ago and given me to freeze. The room went dead silent. My mother's face cycled through various shades of red and white as she sputtered and tried to backtrack, claiming she was just trying to help my stepdaughter improve. I pressed her to tell the truth about why she treated my stepdaughter this way. Finally, she exploded, shouting that my stepdaughter wasn't really family, wasn't my real daughter, and wasn't her real granddaughter. I'd never seen my stepdaughter look so hurt. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she ran from the room. That's when I made my decision. I told my mother that if my stepdaughter wasn't her real granddaughter, then I guess I wasn't her real daughter anymore either. I gathered my family and we left. But here's the thing my mother didn't count on. I'm still that restaurant manager, and I've made a lot of connections in our small town over the years. When word got out about how she'd treated her granddaughter, and yes, I made sure it did, suddenly her weekly lunch club started meeting at a different restaurant. Her bridge group found a new fourth player. The church bake sale committee decided they didn't need her famous pies this year. My mother's still ranting on Facebook about how I ruined her party, but I notice fewer and fewer people are liking her posts. Meanwhile, my stepdaughter and I are planning to teach a mother-daughter cooking class at the community center next month. The sign-up sheet filled up in 2 days. 6 months ago, I was living what most would consider a normal life, working as a software developer, spending weekends hiking, and planning my future. And then the headaches started. At first, they were mild and infrequent, but they gradually became more intense and frequent. After several visits to different doctors and numerous tests, I received news that would change everything. I was diagnosed with a terminal brain disease. The doctors told me the average life expectancy was 4 to 5 years, with a small percentage of patients living 10 to 20 years. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I'm in my early 30s. This wasn't supposed to happen, but I've always been stubborn, and after the initial shock wore off, I decided I wasn't going to let statistics define my future. I'm aiming for 30 to 40 years, and I'm fighting every step of the way. I've been trying to maintain as much normalcy as possible, keeping my condition private unless absolutely necessary. Part of that normalcy included switching mobile carriers last month when I found a better deal. The sales representative promised me a fantastic plan, with all the features I needed at a great price. Everything seemed perfect until I received my first bill. Opening that email, I nearly choked on my morning coffee. The bill was almost $40 more than what I was promised. That's when my interaction with the most persistent customer service representative began. I called customer service and explained my concern about the bill being significantly higher than what I was quoted when I signed up. The representative acknowledged my concern and asked for a moment to review my account. After spending a few minutes looking through my account details, he told me that he found several additional features on my account. He specifically pointed out their premium phone upgrade program, which cost $10 monthly and allowed upgrades to the newest phone every 2 years. I told him I hadn't asked for that program and requested its removal. Instead of complying, he tried to discourage me from removing the feature, warning that once I left the program, I wouldn't be able to rejoin. I repeated that I was fine with that and just wanted it removed. He continued pushing, explaining how I'd only be paying $240 over 2 years and the newest phones usually cost much more than that, insisting it was a great deal. I said I understood but didn't need it, and asked again for its removal. He persisted, telling me how many customers loved this program and that it was one of their most popular features. I repeated my request for removal. Still not giving up, he started trying to explain the benefits again, going on about how quickly technology advances. At this point, I'd had enough. My head was starting to pound and his persistence was pushing me to a breaking point. I normally keep my condition private, but sometimes you need to fight fire with fire. I interrupted him and bluntly explained that I had recently been diagnosed with a terminal brain disease with approximately 4 years to live. I told him rather forcefully that I couldn't care less about upgrading to the latest phone in 2 years, because I'd only be around to use it once anyway. The line went silent for a moment. When he finally spoke again, his tone had completely changed. He quickly agreed to remove the feature. He then volunteered to review my other charges, noting there were several other features I might not need and offering to remove those as well. I agreed and asked him to remove anything that wasn't part of my original quoted plan. He complied immediately, removing all extra features and confirming my monthly bill would now be exactly what I was quoted. He also apologized for the confusion and for being persistent earlier. When he asked if there was anything else he could help with, I declined, and we ended the call. By the time I hung up, my bill had been reduced to exactly what I was originally promised. While I don't usually use my diagnosis to win arguments, sometimes people need a stark dose of reality to stop their entitled behavior. The representative's attitude completely changed after my revelation, and I like to think he'll think twice before pushing unnecessary services on other customers in the future. For once, my diagnosis served as a shield against corporate upselling rather than being just a burden. It wasn't the way I typically handle such situations, but often life gives you lemons, and you make particularly sour lemonade. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.